Hey everyone, it's Tango Oscar Mike. I love Raspberry Pis. Ever since they came out, there's just been something about them that that just makes them so fun to play with and useful. As somebody who did Linux for his job for a while, this is an old Raspberry Pi Model 2B. If you remember, the Model 2B did not have Wi-Fi built into it. You had to have a little USB Wi-Fi dongle for it to have USB. But they've come a long way. This is the Raspberry Pi 3. This one was great, had Wi-Fi and Bluetooth in it. I actually have a new case for this coming with a fan in it because I use this one all the time as my digital mode interface for my base radio, my Yaesu 857. I have this connected to a signal link and it works great. What's great about the Raspberry Pi, as you know, is the OS on the SD card. You can have multiple SD cards and just change the OS when you need to, or reload these. The thing that makes Raspberry Pis so great is they're so universal that everyone is the same, and there's so many of them out there. They're great. The reason I really haven't used one in the field as much as I would like to is because of a screen. You need a screen with it. I really don't care for using VNC on a phone to connect to this. If I had a tablet, it might be different, but I even when I've had it set up and working, I go out in the field, the hotspot doesn't work, or I run into some other issue. Especially for me, if I go out in the backyard, this has the hotspot on it, and it would switch back and forth, and I would have to manually disable the hotspot. But without a screen, if something happens to this, there's not much you can do, and you really can't see what's going on with the device. I have a Raspberry Pi 4 as well, and it's becoming my main one right now. But I've had some problems. I get these buck converter to USB. This one, for example, it says 5 volts at 3 amps max. It does not put out 3 amps. I think it puts out 1.5 amps on each one, which isn't enough for the Raspberry Pis. Even with my Raspberry Pi 3, I'll get the lightning bolt up in the corner, which indicates that this is underpowered. So then I got this buck converter, and I shrink wrapped this one. Again, rated 3 amps max. Plug it in, hook it up to my Raspberry Pi, and you get the lightning bolt every once in a while. It is not putting out 3 amps. And I want to use the Raspberry Pi 4 in the field, and I haven't had much luck. So what I'm using is this Anker USB charger. It's an IQ one, and I think it's rated for 4.5 amps, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. So this one has been working great. I've been using it with this cigarette lighter adapter, and of course Anderson power poles on it here, so I can connect it to everything. And I've been using this. Now it's kind of bulky, for what you're for taking. And if I can find a buck converter that will actually put out enough voltage, I'll definitely use it. The USB port that's on my solar controller only puts out 1 amp, so that's nowhere near enough. So with using a Raspberry Pi in the field, I have a 10-inch Raspberry Pi screen that does, I believe it's 1024 by 768. And that's the minimum screen size you need if you want to run something like flidigi or JS8 call. That's the minimum size you need for the entire application to fit on the screen. But there are other ways to get around that as well. So you got to take a look at this. This is a little 4-inch screen. This is the HyperPixel by Pimoroni. It's 800 by 480. So you can't fit the whole application on the screen, but it works. And this is a really small screen. If you look at the official Raspberry Pi screen, which is a 7-inch screen, it's the same resolution, 800 by 480. The only thing that I don't like about this is that it uses all the GPIO ports, pins for one thing, and the other thing is it's not a native HDMI screen. So if you plug this onto your Raspberry Pi, you have to install software before it will display anything on the screen. So if there's a problem with your OS and you put in a fresh OS, the screen's not going to come up. So that's my complaint with this screen. But as you can see, it's pretty usable. Now let me use my now I'm going to connect to this via VNC just so I can control the mouse and show you some stuff here. But it's very usable. So there's lots of uses for this. If you want the font to be bigger, you can do Control-Alt+ or Control-Shift+. You can make the font bigger so you can read it while you're working. So if the application doesn't fit entirely on the screen, you can do Alt-Space and M, and then you can use the arrow keys to move the application around. And then hit enter to confirm once you have that location selected. So if I run something like fldig, let me fire up fldig. Now I'm probably going to get all kinds of errors because I don't have my USB sound card and stuff plugged in, or my rig control. Yep, so you can see here's this is flmsg, but I can't click the X at the top of the screen. So I do Alt-Space M, and I can move it down to where I need it, hit enter, and now I can minimize it. Yeah, that's okay. We're just going to close flrig because I'm not using it. The same with flamp. I can't use flamp, so Alt-Space M, bring it down so I can adjust it. You can drag and drop it as well too with the mouse. I just find it easier to use the keys. Let me close that. So here's my fldig. I have it running. As you can see, it doesn't all fit on the screen. But if I need to see something at the bottom, I can do Alt-Space M, and I can scroll down or scroll up real quick and read that portion of the screen if I need to. So it's usable. It's not the best solution, but it is definitely usable in this using it this way for such a tiny screen. Now I'm looking at some really cool, they call them Raspberry Pi recovery kits, where it's a screen built into a Pelican case with a keyboard. And what they mean by recovery is that it can be used to help restore network configurations. You can connect it to anything. Typically you would have like a USB to serial adapter in there, your Ethernet ports, and even a hub to give you a network of some kind that you can use to configure other products. So basically, if everything goes down, you can use it as some type of recovery device, which I think is a great idea, and I'm looking into it. But I really like this screen. Now, I didn't get the touch version. The touch version, I think, is $10 or $15 more. And the reason being is this screen's so small, there's no way you would be able to use touch on this anyhow. I don't care what you use, what type of pointer you use, it's just not going to work, I think, as good as you want. I've tried touch on a lot of different screens. What I like about this is I could take this into the field, take my Bluetooth keyboard, and I have a bunch of different Bluetooth keyboards. Well, I have a couple. I have a little handheld one. Let me grab that. This is a nice little House Bell Bluetooth keyboard I've had for a long time. It keeps a good charge. These are the mouse buttons. There's the touchpad. My only complaint with this is it's not backlit. And during winter field day, without this being backlit, I was you can't use it. It's a little bit too difficult. And this is really old, as you can see by the, what is that, micro USB, right? The new one's mini, and then there's USB-C. But yeah, that's the old USB type port. So it's not the best little keyboard as far as that goes because of the age and stuff. But it does work. And the other keyboard I use, if I know I'm going to be typing a lot, I take this little bit bigger. This is a Logitech keyboard with a trackpad on the side. This is as good as typing on a regular keyboard without any trouble. And actually, you can see me moving the window around there on the screen. So this, it is model K400 Plus. This is about as small as you can go if you still want to type. If you're like me who type without looking at the keyboard, actually know how to type. This is about as small as I can go. So if I was doing something like a big contest or something like that, I'm probably going to drag this along. I've seen some smaller folding ones that triple fold that make them a bit smaller, and I actually may try one of those. The problem with those is you can't set them on your lap. You have to have a flat surface to use those. But I think having different options for different situations is a good idea. But that's it. Now, testing this. They mentioned that the screen only uses about 100 milliamps of power. Now, since I'm going from 12 volts, I have this connected to a Bioenno battery right now. Since I have this going from 12 volts into the adapter and into the Pi, I'm only pulling right now about 270 milliamps. The peak milliamps I've seen, even running a bunch of applications, has been about 390 milliamps. So on my 12 amp hour Bioenno battery, I think I could run this for 30 hours by itself with this little screen. Obviously, larger screens are going to take much more power, but really not that much. I do have my 10-inch screen that I bought. It's not touch either. The reason I bought that screen is it's a 12-volt screen. So if you're looking for a screen for your Raspberry Pi, number one, look for a 12-volt screen. Number two, look for a screen that you don't have to install software for it to run. Look for a screen that you can just plug in and not have to install any software, whether that be one that connects directly to the USB port, in this case mini USB ports, or one that hooks into there is a DisplayPort adapter on the Raspberry Pi board. I think the official Raspberry Pi screen, I think that's how it connects. I don't think you need to install any software for that one to work. So that would be my recommendation. I use this and for, like I said, fldigi, flmsg all the time. I play with this with JS8 Call, and this screen, even though it's very small, it's very clear, and to me it's very usable. Now, what I think would be ideal, if I could get a screen that was maybe 6-inch, a 6-inch screen that was at least 1080 by 768. I think that would be the perfect screen for the Raspberry Pi. Now, like I said, this screen is the same resolution as the official Raspberry screen, which is 800 by 480. But it's 7-inch, this is 4-inch. You get 3 more inches. It's probably a little bit easier to read, a little bit easier to work with, but this really isn't too bad. And for having something that small and not having to use your phone to control and being able to use an actual keyboard or something like that in the field. So you can see the screen on this is really pretty good. There's no audio. Some screens have built-in audio. This one does not. You could always plug in a headset though to take care of that. But for video and stuff like that, it's really a pretty nice screen. Now with this screen, there's not. There is a fan shim that you can install to help keep the Raspberry Pi 4 cooler. I need to. I don't actually have any heat dissipation on my chip, because I had this in a case that didn't have, I had this in the passive flirk case, which is a metal case that touches directly on the CPU and uses passive heat cooling to keep it cool. But I'm going to be putting this into a case where it'll have a fan that will blow over, and it'll help keep the CPU cool. But I've actually been running it just like this, and I haven't had any trouble. It hasn't overheated yet. And you hear so many things about the heat on the Raspberry Pi 4 causing a problem. As you can see up in the corner, I'm at 50 degrees Celsius, and it's dropping now since I'm no longer watching YouTube. Well, it's down to 48 now. So I think a little fan blowing across this will make a nice difference, especially if you're outside in the summer and it's hot. But if anybody knows of a buck converter, USB buck converter that will pull at least 3 to 4 amps, 12 volt buck converter USB that will pull 3 to 4 amps, please let me know in the comments, because I'd probably buy one to save some space on this. But all the ones I've had, and I actually had a couple of other ones too, they don't work. They don't actually pull enough amperage to keep the Raspberry Pis running. That's why I think a lot of people still use the Raspberry Pi 3, is because of the extra power requirements, and finding something that has enough power to power this is not an option. I tried using a lot of old phone chargers I have. I have a bunch of 2 amp phone chargers, USB chargers, and when I would run this with the 2 amp one, you get weird problems. You get issues with the Raspberry Pi hanging up and locking up. I had trouble with the output on my USB sound card. It wasn't always triggering the push to talk, and when it would try, the lightning bolt would show up and show that I didn't have enough power, so it didn't have enough power to actually drive the sound card. So I hope you enjoyed this video of this little tiny screen, the Raspberry Pi. I think the Raspberry Pi is great for ham radio, especially the KM4 ACK Build-A-Pi script. It is fantastic. Definitely check that out. Where I think Raspberry Pis really shine is using them in your shack as a dedicated computer for your digital modes. That way you're not adjusting the sound settings and everything on your main desktop. You're not experimenting, so when you need it, it'll always be working. So that's my recommendation, is to use one of these as a dedicated device for your digital communications in your shack. You can hook these up to any size screen as long as you have HDMI. The Raspberry Pi 3 has native HDMI, so you can plug directly into it. The Raspberry Pi 4 has these mini HDMI ports, so you need an adapter cable to plug into it. But the Raspberry Pi 4, as you can see, can run dual monitors, and it actually works really well. So, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is Tango Oscar Mike, 73. Take care.
Tango Oscar Mike.